Kunja Vihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Gopi Janabala Girivardhari. Gopi Janabala Girivardhari. Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari. Jai Ramadhava Kunjabihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Rama Ramo, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Om Vishnupada. Divine Grace. Ace. All glory, all glories to Samad. All glories to Sri Sri Guru. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dati Swapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sakrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Harijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Pashanda Patta Vaishamyam Pashanda Patta Vaishamyam Pratiloma Niveshanam Pratiloma Niveshanam Jivasya Gatayo Yascha Jivasya Gatayo Yascha Yavatir Guna Karma Jaha Yavatir Guna Karma Jaha Pashanda Pattavaishamyam Pratiloma Niveshanam Jivasya Gatayo Yascha Yavatir Guna Karma Jaha Pashanda Pattavaishamyam Pratiloma Niveshanam Jivasya Gatayo Yascha Yavati Guna Karma Jaha Pashanda Pattavaishamyam Pratiloma Niveshanam Jivasya Gatayo Yascha Yavati guna karmaja Pashanda Patha Vaishamyam Pratiloma Niveshanam Jivasyo Gatayo Yascha Yavati Guna Karma Jaha Pashanda Patha, the path of faithlessness, of the faithless. I'm sorry. Vaishamyam, imperfection by contradiction. Pratiloma, crossbreeding. Niveshanam, situation. Jivasya, of the living entities. Gatayaha, movements. Yaha, as they are. Cha, also. Yavatihi, as many as. Guna, modes of material nature. Karma jaha, generated by different works. So the translation reads, please also describe the imperfections and contradictions of the faithless atheists, the situation of crossbreeding, and the movements of the living entities in various species of life according to their particular modes of nature and work. So I say you all please repeat. Please also describe the imperfections and contradictions of the faithless atheists, the situation of the crossbreeding, and the movements of the living entities in various species of life according to their particular modes of nature and work. Okay, short purport by Srila Prabhupada. The combination of living entities and different modes of material nature is called crossbreeding. The faithless atheists do not believe in the existence of God, and thus their path of philosophy are contradictory. Atheistic philosophies never agree with one another. Different species of life are evidence of the varieties of mixtures of the modes of material nature. Pashanda Pata Vaishamyam Pratiloma Niveshanam Jivasya Gatayo Yascha Yavatir Guna Karma Jaha. Please also describe the imperfections and contradictions of the faithless atheists, the situation of crossbreeding, and the movement of the living entities in various species of life according to their particular modes of nature and work. Purijan mentioned in his book, uh, Unveiling His Lotus Feet, which is a summary or a sort of study guide for Srimad Bhagavatam. He mentions that here Vidura is asking something on the order of 40 questions in this section, from about verse 23 to verse 38 or something thereabouts. So there are a lot of questions being put forward. And it shows that Vidura is eager to learn. At the same time, to ask so many questions, he has to be fairly philosophical. You don't just come up with questions like that. 40 questions, boom, 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 all in a row. Vidura is asking all these questions, and they're interesting questions too. Um, Questions that really help us to understand why we're here in this world and what's going on. Questions like, what about the Varnashram system? Uh, how are the demigods generated? What's the relationship of the Supreme Lord and the individual soul? How are they different? The nature of the journey of the living entities through various species, as we're hearing about in today's verse. The planetary systems, what are their sizes and dimensions? What are their movements? So one of the things that's asked here is the question, how the living entities are encased in different kinds of species type bodies, and how did they get there, and what will happen to them next. So there is a whole section, which will be later in the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. No, it's in this canto, it's in the third canto. Kapila Dev, and I think he talks in a chapter called Movements of the Living Things. Either in this third or fourth canto, I don't remember which off the top of my head. But as a person creates various kinds of actions because of his material desires in his life. So at the end of life, one then gets a review of all the composite of all the things we've done, pious and impious. And there is a judgment. And usually most people fail the test. And generally they're demoted to animal species lower, sometimes even plant species or micro species, how seriously you messed up in this lifetime. So this is done by Yamaraj. And because we are adrift or floating in the modes of material nature, sometimes one of the modes pushes us more than the other. And in general, like novice sailors, we don't know how to handle the winds. We just get buffeted around by them, and whatever direction they push us is what direction we wind up going. So this is why people in general do not become perfected. Now, if there is a pious society set up with proper implementation of Varna and Ashram, there is a general tendency with the right society that even people who aren't really watching what they're doing will tend to rise slightly. But in our present society, which is everything helter-skelter, anyone who doesn't watch what they're doing is certainly on an incline downward. That's just the way it works. Because people think the goal of life is material happiness, and getting their material happiness, they inevitably start to get a taste for darker and darker forms of happiness, and they rack up big sinful reactions. And by the time that they leave their body, usually it's off to an animal, or maybe if they're lucky, back in the human species again. So to know these things, these 40 so questions that Vidura is putting before Maitreya, to understand them means we get a good, clear, structural sense of what's going on in this world, how it's going on, how it was created. He'll also explain, that one of the questions Vidura how is it destroyed too, and who doesn't get destroyed and serves the Supreme Lord in the interim period between destruction. And so we're going to hear about all these various subject matters in the unfolding of Srimad Bhagavatam. Particularly the focus today here, one of the big focuses is atheism, which is quite an important factor in our modern day. We see that as Kali Yuga progresses, people become, um, in larger proportions, atheistic. In fact, in a lot of popular presentations on the internet, on television, other kinds of media, atheists are gloating that there's no way back for religion, and religion is just a relic of bygone era when people didn't know no better about nothing. And so now people are too smart to be taken advantage of by religion and all of its childish explanations, things. But this is just empty boasting. The necessity of the soul to connect with the Supreme Lord is something that can't not be trampled out or ignored. And everyone, including the atheists, eventually will come around to understanding something about the Supreme when given enough time, enough lifetime. The reason that the atheists' views are contradictory is because they're all based on speculation. Um, there's a nice verse in the Mahabharata, Karko Pratishta Shruyato Dharma Siddham Nehitam Mahayam Mahajano Yenagatasapam Karko Pratishta Shruyato Nasa Dharma Siddham Nehitam Mahayam and that is Varna Vanaparva um, 919 dot 114 or something like that. Cited in the Sacred Literature. And this is, of course, Yudhisthira. This verse is Yudhisthira talking to the mysterious Yaksha, that is the proprietor of a pond. The Pandavas, while they were fighting the battle of Kurukshetra, became very thirsty and they needed some water. One of them climbed a tree and saw some birds, and they know where there's a lot of birds and water, so they went in that direction. And of course, they never returned, and eventually all the brothers went one after another to find out what had happened to the other brothers. And there was only Yudhishthira at the very end. So what had happened is that each brother went to the pond and they were about to drink from the water, and a mysterious voice said, "Wait, I own this water, and you can have a drink from it, but only when you answer my question." And the other Pandavas answered, "I don't need to answer your questions. I'm thirsty." And the minute they started to drink the water, they fell dead. So all four Pandavas are dead now, except for Yudhishthira. Only Yudhishthira comes, and when he starts to drink the water, he's amazed that all of his brothers have been killed in some mysterious way. He knows how powerful they are. So they're all lying dead. And he begins to drink the water, and the same mysterious voice says, "Wait, I own this pond, and you can drink from it, but not until you answer my question." So he says, "Okay, what are your questions?" So Yudhishthira takes the challenge, and then this mysterious Yaksha asks all these questions. Of course, one of the questions is, how can the truth be known? How can the real truth be known? Because we will see, and you all will meet sometime in the future. Questions about the real nature of what Krishna consciousness is and what it is not. And depending on, to the extent that you have made an effort to understand our philosophy by reading and discussing, is whether you will do well or not. And so this is there in the future. There will always be those times where you have devotees on one side saying one thing, devotees on the other side saying something very different, and each one is pointing to the other as being misrepresenting the philosophy, etc., etc. So how do we know? So we have Tarko Pratishta. Dry arguments are useless. Tarko is argument. So Tarko means arguments. Apratishta, they don't stand. Tarko Pratishta. Shruyato Vibhinam. This is the other one. Shruyato, the Vedas, Shruti, Vibhinam are many branched. They appear to say apparently different things in different places. So dry arguments are useless. Vedas seem to espouse various different threads of philosophy. Then we have Nasa Rishir Yasya Matam Nibinam, that a rishi or a philosopher is not taken as being important unless he contradicts the previous philosopher. And that is a perfect explanation of our entire history of philosophy in the Western world. Each philosopher stood up and said something that completely contradicted what philosophers before had said. So this is the nature of Western philosophy, that to be a good Western philosopher, you have to contradict what the previous philosopher said. To be a Vedic philosopher, you should not do that. You should explain exactly what the previous philosophers had said and not contradict any of it. So this shows how it's different. So we found three things that don't work. One of them is dry argument, tarko pratishta. Second is scanning the Vedas, which we get the different shlokas, the different folks, phenomena. So that's Shruyato Vivinam. And then we get the Nasa Vrishir Yasya Matam Nibinam, which means that if we're going to be an important philosopher, we have to make some strong pronouncements that are decidedly different. So how do we find it? Well, Dharmasya Tattvam Nihitam Guhaya Mahajano Panta. So the solid truth of spiritual life is hidden in the heart of a pure devotee. So we should follow whatever progressive path the great devotees chalk out. So this means that we need to have the connection of some pure devotee whose understanding we trust. Of course, eventually we have to become a devotee like that, someone who understands the Vedas up one side and down the other and can understand what is most important and what's less important and what's a misrepresentation of Vedic knowledge. Because there will be misrepresentation of Vedic knowledge. Of course, the atheists never represent Vedic knowledge. They care less about Vedic knowledge. They have their own ideas. But atheism never lasts in the long run. So what's interesting, actually, if you study the history of thought by intellectual people in our modern world, there's actually a very nice group of lectures by a man named Hako Barsegyan in University of Toronto, where he talks about a subject that's known as the philosophy of science. Now, philosophy of science is one of those names that misleads people right off the bat. It's not what you think it is. Philosophy of science is, in one sense, kind of the history of science, and it's also the study of how science does what it does. What are the philosophical underpinnings of it? So we see that at one time we had the Greeks. They had their four elements. Why they didn't like calm or ether. I don't know why they did. Water, fire, air, and fire. Water, fire, earth, and air. Right. Right. So they had those, and they argued among themselves which one of them was the most important and which one the other ones came from. And so this was the way people thought. And there was worship for the demigods, particularly in Greece, where Western culture apparently seems to um, think of itself as originating from. And there was some mathematics at that time. At that time, we had Pythagorean theorem, which had been discovered in India before, but Pythagoras made it popular in the Western world. And there was a view of the planets and stars being in a kind of canopy overhead, not very far away. And so this is kind of the time of the Greeks. Then we go further down the line and we have where people are starting to question things. We have this maybe God is not about dogma, but he's rational, and by following reason, we will understand things. We have people like um, Descartes coming up with the Cartesian mathematical system so that you can plot things on a map, a grid, and we have this idea that there is a kind of political system that's better than others, democratic system, and there was a discovery of the telescope a little bit later down the line, and maybe the stars are farther away than we thought they were, and then we have the Copernican revolution where suddenly we discover sun is the actual center of everything, and we start moving into a different worldview. What you'll see is that this isn't a one-time thing. This is constantly happening. That pieces are being discovered. People come up with big theories. These theories are very important, and we're sure that we're onto the solid truth now. But there's a few problems here and there, and eventually those problems become big problems. And instead of solving those problems, we move on to something new. So eventually, you know, Pythagoras and the various Greeks, Socrates, etc., gave way. There was Aristotle. Now practically nobody believes anything Aristotle came up with. Although at one point he was a very important philosopher. Practically the whole world revolved around Aristotle's view of things. Then, there were later other philosophers that came, the, German idealists and eventually English empiricists. And then science starts to come to the fore, and we have Isaac Newton comes up with physics, and we're starting to learn about physics and a little about chemistry. And then, gradually that's supposed to explain everything. And then Einstein comes along more in a more contemporary time, and he discovers um, relativity. And during his time, others discover the quantum world, which makes no sense at all, but somehow or another is part of reality. And so you can see how each era, in some cases, builds on the previous one, in other cases, throws things away. Uh, it's a constant shift of things because if you take Krishna out of the equation, you can't ever have a bottom line because everything eventually goes to Krishna. Everything is connected to Krishna in some way or another. So if you don't want to make that last connection, you're like a boat with no anchor. You'll just drift. And like Darwin's theory came up about 150 years ago or something like that. We heard that soon archaeologists would find these missing links, and we would see how Darwin's theory, how species would change little by little, and eventually they would change into some wholly new animal. This was the promise given. However, somehow or another, these missing links never really showed up. So they had to create some. They had to find various kinds of bone collections which they could put together that if you look at them sideways and really do a lot of wishful thinking that it looks like something between a human and an ape, cetera, et cetera. So the explanations of the atheist never actually get successfully refuted by those who don't believe the arguments of the atheist. However, the atheists just move on to a new theory later on. They just move on. And each 50, 100 years, the whole thing changes. Things that were believed in the time of Aristotle are no longer believed now. The things that were believed in the time of even Isaac Newton, mostly we don't believe them now. Many things moved on. And so this is the nature of atheistic philosophy. It never quite grasps anything, but what it does do is it holds out that kind of threadbare hope that we can create and understand our whole world without having to talk about God. And if we can do that, then we don't have to worry about doing something that somebody else wants. We can just be what we want to be and enjoy whatever we want to enjoy, and we don't have to worry about anything. So it's an interesting word that Prabhupada uses here, crossbreeding. This is pratiloma and aniloma, where you have the connection between a Brahmana, man of and a Kshatriya woman. I think that's pratiloma, and then the other way around, a Brahmana woman, a Kshatriya man. That's aniloma, or maybe it's the other way around. One of those. Okay, so I had it backwards. Okay, on is a Brahmana man, Kshatriya woman, and Pratiloma is Kshatriya man and Brahmana. This is a mixing between varnas. So, um, and of course, like a painter, these modes of nature and these varnas are mixed in the age of Kali Yuga, and they become more mixed, and they become more mixed. So there are 8,400,000 species of life according to the Vedic explanation. And why are there so many species? Because there are so many desires and so many karmas. And that's one of the things that will be talked about in the Srimad Bhagavatam a little later down the road. We will learn how it is that a person becomes a worm or a bird or a tiger or a monkey or something like that. How does a person lose the human form and go down into lower species? And what do they need to do to get up? Of course, they don't have to do anything. Once a person falls into the animal species, they're automatically lifted from one species to the next higher species, one step at a time. So it's a long process. You can fall way down into the animal species. Like an image that seems to correlate. Yeah, right. So, which is causing our Google to sync up here. So, animals are in a particular mode, and since they do not are not able to exercise their free will, animals cannot create bad karma. Animals simply are burning off bad karma. That's all that's happening with the animal species. So the only thing you can do in the animal and lower species of life is burn off bad karma, and eventually you'll come back. In the human form, you can go up or down, but in the animal form, you can only go up. But if you go way down, you're going to be a while before you come back up. You got to go through all the stages. Of course, people don't know this, and this is why we have Bhagavatams. We can learn these things. We can learn how to, be able to recognize what will happen to us if we act um, without any kind of care or without any attention. We act as if we were asleep. Okay, so the first part of this chapter, chapter 7, we had about 10 verses where we heard about Vidura's questions, actually from 1 to about 8 Vidura's questions. And from 9 to 17, we heard Maitreya's answers. Then from 18 to 22, Vidura accepts Maitreya's answers. And now from 23, actually all the way through to the end, we hear more questions. So this is the nature of being intent to be delivered from the material world. Understand what our philosophy is, how to apply it, and then to try to gradually bring oneself into alignment with the philosophy, which is the difficult part. So, question or realization? Yes. Where's our pastor around?
Comment. In London, all the buses have big advertising. In London, all those big double buses, they have big advertising on the side. So one year, the atheists decided to advertise. So they wrote many buses, and it said, "Probably there's no God, so enjoy life." Atheist.com and some of them.
Yeah. There's a
They
lot
couldn't, the Christians told them if they said there's no God, then they would stop the whole campaign. So they had probably.
Probably. What's interesting is that they now have atheist churches because they learned that there's something that religious people do is get together and do things, and that actually gives them a spirit. So atheists thought, well, why can't we do this too? So they have like their big, yeah, Sunday morning atheist thing where they come and I guess they just blab about stuff and explain how God doesn't exist, and then eat whatever it is they're going to eat. But anyway, it's kind of hilarious. Okay.
I just want to say
Back to
thank you for giving class as always. I kind of have a question and also a statement. I think Prabhupada, right? You would say that even atheists, in the end, they believe in God because Kala, right? Kala comes for us all, where we all die, and so in the end, there's no atheism. We really can't deny death. Death is a part of God.
Right.
So,
right.
so how can we preach to these atheists in a way that isn't just saying, "Well, you're gonna die"? Like I think that there's it's almost like a safety net for these people where they may have had a bad taste in their mouth about religion or haven't been introduced to God in the correct way.
Right.
And Krishna is all attractive, right? So we can attract those people too. How do we go about doing that?
Well, that's the thing actually that there are those atheists who are completely fixed on atheism. You're not going to be able to do anything with them unless you're make some hit on them. For the most part, we can't. But there are people who are atheists because either they've been burned by religion or they've had some really ridiculous understanding of religion pushed on them, which is understandable why they would be atheists as a result of that. So, one of the things that really makes a difference is you have to be attractive yourself. If you are attractive in what you are and what you do, then other people will wonder, how do I get whatever that is? So we talk about a process, and people are actually looking for something if they hit a crisis point in their lives. Generally speaking, that's what it takes many times is to have the bottom fall out. And when the bottom falls out in your life, then you're looking for something. As long as you think, that there's the big apple of material happiness out there somewhere, you just have to find it. Um, Spiritual life does not take place. Krishna says that by those who are attracted to material desires and follow them, the resolute determination if we think that material happiness is real and we can get it somehow, if we just play our parts right, then no matter how much we talk to people, have that you know commitment or that conception, we can't do much to them because they always think, oh, okay, sounds good, but there's no commitment there because they're still really thinking, I can be happy some way, somehow. The the great pumpkin is out there, and I'm going to get it, and I'll be happy.
Can we trick them with prashad?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the secret weapons that even if people can't take philosophy, they can take prasad. Or sometimes they're attracted by music, or sometimes by something
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
else. All right.
Thank you, Mark, for the class. So you were saying this words about Tarko Pratishta, Shrutiya Vibhinna, how so many, all the philosophers, they have so many different opinions. But if we want to get to the essence of all knowledge, you have to follow in the path of the Mahajans. But we see even in, when we are all trying to follow Sri Prabhupada, Alfonso, so we read his books and hear his lectures.
Mhm.
But even after doing so, we find differences in the opinions of the devotees. For example,
Ah,
for example,
therein lies the rub.
yeah. So I had discussion about for just this just one example where we had discussion about attendance of morning program. So I've got different devotees saying different things. Like uh, one person said, when you get initiated, you only give a vow to chant 16 rounds and follow four regular principles. So you don't take a vow that you will attend morning program.
Mhm.
Whereas in Prabhupada's books, we find how much, and letters and many lectures everywhere, Prabhupada emphasizes the attendance of morning program.
Mm.
So like that, different devotees, they make up so many other things where it actually compromises the whole thing. So
Mhm.
when we see this happening, if we speak about it, it leads to, again, the dry arguments and basically bitterness
Mhm.
among devotees. And when we don't speak about it, what happens is we find that concern, of Prabhupada's movement being watered down.
Mhm.
So what should we do?
Well, um, one thing that I think is important to recognize is in Bhagavad Gita in 12th chapter, it talks about different circles. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that always think of me. So that's like the first circle. But most people can't always think of Krishna because that really, if you're going through advanced stages of Ragatmik or Bhakti. So beneath that, Krishna says, well, if you can't do that, then you have to follow the process of devotional service. And this way you will develop a desire to attain to me, which is circle two. So that's what we're doing. Then if you can't do that, then work for me. That's circle three. So in other words, you have this sort of circles within circles or various echelons of people. And then after some time, you can see by the commitment a person makes, by the standards that they follow, there's certain people who are in circle two, really trying to, uh, follow the regular principles of devotional service. And then there are those who are in circle three, which are just working for Krishna. They do some things for Krishna, and they may not follow all the regular principles. They may not do a lot of other things like that. They're also making progress, but it's not nearly as significant progress as those in circle two. And of course, there's even a circle four, which is, just engage in pious activity. So that's, even further sort of out there. So we have these various circles, And um, in general, we should, if we look at what Prabhupada asks us to try to follow. Of course, I don't think anybody can follow the things that Prabhupada laid out for us to do 100%. We all follow, whatever it is, 50, 60% or whatever it is. And, someone's strong in one side, someone else is strong in another side. And in this way, we try to do the best we can. Certainly, we should follow the things that we make a specific vow to when we take initiation, 16 rounds, follow the regular principles. That's kind of the absolute bottom line. If you're going to be in circle two, but some people may even get initiated and wind up really following circle three, where they're doing something for Krishna in some ways, but maybe they don't chant, maybe they don't come to the temple except once a week, or maybe not even that, et cetera, et cetera. You'll see these different things. And you will see, and we are seeing now, a debate over what are the, actual standards. So that's going on. There's some, discussion about that. But just uh, for your own understanding is we really cannot cause or force anyone to do anything. A person has to, by their own desire, want to elevate themselves to a higher platform of Krishna consciousness. And when you meet, and you will meet people who are either misunderstanding Krishna or following Krishna in a very sort of lackadaisical way. And if through philosophical explanation that doesn't make any difference, then I think the next important thing is to just back off. But what you can do then is pray for Krishna to give them the motivation to become more sincere or more vigorous in their application of Krishna consciousness. Because um, this is one of those things that you always come across, is that there's nothing you can do to beyond a certain point. You know, if you have a position, you can try to use that position to leverage a person's change in behavior. Some cases, you can bargain with a person to change their behavior. But after a few tries, basically you're out of options. The only option left is to pray for them. And then if you pray for them, eventually Krishna will do something that will change their consciousness and bring them to a higher level. And I think that's an important thing to always be aware of. Because if you try to force people, then oftentimes you do exactly the opposite of what you're hoping to accomplish. You make people angry, bitter, or annoyed, and that's not really what we want to do. We want to get people to voluntarily, because to make progress in Krishna consciousness requires an inner change of heart, and it requires a kind of diligence that, unless you're serious, you won't have. It comes and goes for some people, and some people make more direct progress. Depends also on offenses. People who make offenses kind of zigzag their way through Krishna consciousness. They're in, then they're out, then they're out. But those who are more scrupulous about that tend to gradually make a straight line, heading in a general upward direction. So, okay, one last question.
Sorry, I guess doing this made me have another question. How would you suggest someone who feels that to be initiated, they really hold in a reverence? You know, they feel like in order to be initiated, you have to meet these certain standards. Um, when hearing this, it's making me think that maybe other people don't feel that way, where, you know, because chanting 16 rounds and the four regulative principles, I feel like is just a baseline. You know what I mean? There's so much more that really is a Vaishnava that, for me, I'm speaking personally, that I feel like I will never attain a certain standard that I'll be um, able to be. How can someone um, feel that they are worthy of initiation if they can't feel like they can meet those standards?
Well, there's many standards. And what we know is that we do what we can do at the moment, the best we can do. And generally, we see that that brings us to a step higher. The minimum requirements for initiation is confirmed or consent to chanting 16 rounds, following and doing some kind of service. So that's kind of the minimum. If we do that, then we'll see that if we're sincere and avoid offenses, we'll see that gradually we will be able to make progress. There's a list of 26 qualities of a devotee, and we discover that in book it is, we find that there's what's called Tatastha Lakshana, and I can't think of a Sanskrit word for it, but there is those qualities that are for a devotee, incidental qualities. They may be there, they may not be there, but there is one Swarupa Lakshana, that's what it is, one quality of a devotee that must be there, and all the other, what's that? Swarupa. Isn't that what I just said? Okay. He just got a few seconds later. Okay, good. So there's Tastalakshana and Swarupalakshana. So out of the 26 qualities of devotee, what would you say is one of those 26 qualities is absolutely necessary? If you know this already, don't.
Humility,
What's that?
like humility, like humble.
We would think, right? It is one of the that is one of the 26 qualities, but it's Tastalakshana.
I don't know.
Anybody have any idea what out of the 26 qualities we have? Okay, just everybody else is drawing a blank and we're running out of time. Yes, actually, that's pretty close, almost there. It's called Eka Krishna Sharana, taking shelter only in Krishna. That's the one and only Swarup Lakshana, the one and only quality that one absolutely has to have to be a devotee. All the other qualities will come. So,
So I don't have to cut my hair.
what's that?
I don't have to cut my hair.
Well, technically, no, but
It's
you
on
know,
camera. It's documented.
right, right. Well, you're doing what we were talking about the other day, where we have that you're doing the brahmachari Bhagavatam version with the dreads and the water pot and the deer skin.
Yes.
So,
Pusa
so
grass.
anyway, but actually, as one follows Krishna consciousness, all the other qualities gradually accrue. So we find that what is it? Yes, yes, Deepakir Bhagavati Kinchana I believe that's the verse. Yes, yes, Deepakir Bhagavati Kinchana Hara Bhavaktastu Kuto Mahadguna. And that verse is saying that all the good qualities of the demigods, including knowledge, religion, etc., become established in the body of one who is a follower or a servant of the Mukunda, giver of liberation. On the other hand, those who do not follow or serve the Supreme Lord have no good qualities, even if they're adept at the process of mystic yoga or the honest endeavor of maintaining their family and relatives. Such persons must be driven by their own mental speculations of how can there be good qualities in such a person. So that's what that last line is. The mono retain mono. Yeah, yes, yes. Here, so mono retain is the chariot of the mind, and we all know the chariot of the mind. Travel all over the universe in our mind, doing all kinds of crazy things. So that's why we have to keep the mind under control. Okay, so all the good qualities will gradually be bestowed on a person, even in a faulty manner, follows the process of Krishna consciousness. Okay, all